Hey fam, welcome back. Hopefully you're doing good and having a great day. If you're not, please let me know what I can do to help you. Until then, I wanted to make a video that was supposed to be for today to be somewhat relieving, or at least a little bit, which is my intention, especially with what has happened these past few days. But that didn't happen. Hopefully that'll be tomorrow. And so today, what we're talking about is what I expect to happen in the immediate future and more long term. But before I talk about that, what I really want to touch on is explain to you guys more of the core issue of how we really got here. So, the things that are happening with, people like Tyler who go and take the lives of the innocent is only a byproduct of the result of rhetoric. Excuse me, the result of the rhetoric. The result of the rhetoric that is coming out from our politicians, mainstream media, which is incentivized through these corporate conglomerates who are donating millions of dollars to their campaigns. So obviously, they're going to satisfy that special interest instead of helping the American people, the backbone of society. So let's think back, right? Let's think back to when I believe things really began to change and which really started the snowballing. I definitely believe it was during, well, I mean, shit. How far back do you really want to go? You know, I would say Kennedy's time, right? With the assassination of not just Kennedy, but MLK, right? MLK and JFK were individuals who really wanted to help, or as far as I know, they really wanted to help the American people, to unite, to expose the evil, or at least JFK, to expose the evil doing the corruption of the government, which LBJ just couldn't really have. And then Martin Luther King wanted to unite, Americans. And when that was silenced, it's always the voice of reason that is silenced first, I believe. I think that is just the natural course that humanity really takes. Because there's a point in time when we, as animals, refuse reason and we resort to baser instinct. And I think that cycle is really coming to the end of it. Or, excuse me, I think that that cycle has reached its end. Um, and so there were movements that were incited, such as Marxism through um, Malcolm X, that were pushing more hatred, especially coming from the black community uh, against whites, of course. But the the Democratic Party has always been more of a have always used more underhanded tactics, and even back then, convincing others, or I should say, incent or manipulating and gaslighting people for the effort of being divisive for control, right? Now, I, for one, definitely believe that it doesn't matter Democrat or Republican, both are still shit, of course, yes. Our government has been completely taken over and compromised by special interests. That's true. And that has been that way for a long time. What I'm just speaking to you out loud is the thoughts that I have as far as the research that I have done, which explains to how we got here. Now, we could bring up Rockefellers and the robber barons and all those guys, and I think that that definitely has a lot of um, hand in it, right? Because in that time period, there were incentives for government and corporation industry to work hand in hand with each other because that's how they make most of the profit and control by creating all of these monopolies for themselves and insider trading, of course. And so there is a hand in that because when you constrict the ability for the average person, I would say average man, but today, with the advent of feminism and all this other shit, I would say the average person. But the average person to be held down and constricted. So much so that it's a mode they've been thrown into a mode of survival. Obviously, we saw that with the 20s and or I mean not maybe not the 20s, but the the turn of the century, right? 1900s. And then the 30s, which we are now coming to full circle because of the greed of corporations and government working together. And COVID really proved that. And just so I'm not, bouncing back and forth in between a lot of different areas, back to the division, right? The FBI absolutely, or was it the CIA? It was either the FBI or the CIA. I think it was the FBI. The FBI absolutely are the ones that assassinated uh, Martin Luther King. The family has said so themselves. They actually spoke with the fall guy and they told him themselves that we know for a fact you are not the killer. And so all of this was in an effort to silence those who would unite Americans together and to start realizing what the real issues are. This, as many people, other YouTubers, as well as myself, are saying the same thing, that this is not a left versus right issue. This isn't a Republican versus Democrat issue. This is the average person issue. This is a control issue, right? When I say average person versus oligarchies issue, right? Haves versus have-nots. This is something that I have been saying almost through the entire history of this channel. So after those prominent figures were silenced, the voice of reason was essentially gone until the turn of the 2000s, right? When things increasingly began to get worse and our government, granted itself more power, right? Through laws, policies, such as banning fully automatic weapons. Or classifying them differently and then banning them, and then also reclassifying firearms that fit their narrative, and then beginning to slowly but surely convince the people to believe whatever rhetoric that they, spew out, right? And as we know, the CIA was absolutely created for propaganda against the Nazis, and now they were using that to control the people. We know that. There's evidence of that. Obviously, that was the case because, or I mean, I know the CIA, and I mean, of course, the CIA and FBI are involved together. It's it's a fucking three-letter agency, right? They're all involved. Now, of course, there are some good people in there that really care and they want to do the right thing, but there's just too many people who aren't. And so all I'm doing is explaining what history has shown us. Um, Speculation comes for me when we get to the part of the future. So, um, we look at what happened in Kenosha, with Kenosha Kid, and how the FBI was all over that, surveilling the entire thing and using every single scrap of evidence that they could to essentially um, put any kind of evidence together against Kyle and make him guilty, right? But when it's the other side, right, who do all these atrocities, which in most cases are, right, especially them being trans, the FBI seems to really drop the ball. And this really takes me back to not just Obama's presidency, but Bush's presidency as well. Because Bush, along with whoever he was working with, getting involved in places that we shouldn't have, like Afghanistan, Iraq. We shouldn't have been over there. You begin to see that there were always some kind of incitement from the quote unquote establishment, right? Because during the early 2000s, right, it was Muslims, right? We all, and this is just what was happening at the time. A lot of people were rallying against Islam, right? Obviously, because of the extremists who hijacked the planes and then flew into the North and South Towers, which was completely the result of our government working with rebels to overthrow Saddam, and then or I and then having the CIA operative Bin Laden, I believe, completely backstabbing him and leading to the situation. Uh, so, and maybe I'm just putting my fucking tinfoil hat on, right? Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I don't believe so. I don't believe so. We do know that he was a CIA operative. We absolutely do know. We know that, just like how Jeffrey Epstein was an operative. But you see, there were sowing, even as subtle as it was, they were sowing division Even before that, obviously, because that's why I brought up the the 60s and 70s. Because I believe no. I think it was more of the 60s. I mean, it for sure was more of the 60s. But I don't think it was really. No, the 70s too, because when the Vietnam veterans were coming back, there was a lot to do with that as well. Our government being involved in things that they shouldn't. So I mean, we all knew that there was a massive anti-war sentiment. Unfortunately, they directed a lot of that at the veterans who had no choice because they were drafted. Um, but there was a large sentiment there, and they realized that they couldn't keep doing it any longer. So obviously, they pulled out. And perhaps they had already had enough opium, to move into the black community, um, because that was going on too. There's all kinds of things from all different directions where pushes were being made to destroy the country from inside out, right? To get the black community addicted to all kinds of different drugs, marijuana, opium, cocaine. Um, and then you had things that slowly destroyed and constricted them, right? Such as redlining, and then welfare, and all of this other shit. But of course, then you had eugenics and everything like that came about, Planned Parenthood, um, that was only exacerbating that problem, right? Again, it's control. It's control. They've tried many, 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 many different ways for control, and they eventually found something that worked, right? And I always bring up Rockefeller because it says it all. Rockefeller was very adamant about a nation of workers instead of nation of thinkers, right? Someone who is going to walk in lockstep because they're too afraid to lose their jobs, that they won't say anything. They'll accept what they have. They will work until they're dead, and they'll be happy for what they have. It's exactly the kind of workers, not thinkers, that Rockefeller, people like Rockefeller, wanted. And obviously, the government was complicit in that because it explains all of it explains their actions. And then not just the black community was affected, because then you also had affirmative action. You had, again, going back in time. I know I'm going everywhere here, but there's a lot of points to be made here. You go back in time with the 16th Amendment, which the government granted itself, crazy enough, to gain more control. To gain more control. It was a show, you understand. It was a show. It was a show to show the average it was a show to perform for the average person like you and me, that the government was doing something to help us, when in reality, applied, it does the exact opposite. And so, with the attack on 9/11, gave the government a reason to go back over there and take the fight to the terrorists. Now, they absolutely were terrorists. For sure they were. Right? But the government has had a long history of provoking war. The Spanish American War was one huge, huge example of that. If you don't know anything about the Spanish American War, I would take a look into it. Or I'm sorry, not the Spanish American War, the Mexican American War. Sorry, Let me rephrase that: the Mexican-American War. Um, but you had a we've always had a government that I don't really believe has had not always. I'm sure in the beginning it had, good intentions, but eventually, and this is what I always say too, eventually if you don't have any safeguards to prevent something being corrupted by human nature, it will eventually come to fruition. And even though I love freedom, freedom is one of those ideals that we have within our own conscious that can be corrupted. And we haven't been free people in a long time. In a long time. Especially now because people are being shot and killed right in front of their family for speaking their beliefs. So we were given reasons to go over to Afghanistan and Iraq to fight a war that we didn't need to, throwing away countless lives for no fucking reason except for the reason of benefiting those who were sending people to die. And so through Obama's presidency, that began to get worse. While he was championing the fact that Osama was taken out, there was a push for surveillance, and not surveillance to help people, to protect people, surveillance to spy on the American people, which is exactly why Edward Snowden did what he did. So, and there's still a manhunt for him. He hasn't been pardoned. And a matter of fact, even if he does get pardoned, they would still kill him anyways, should they get the chance. Because he exposed the evil within the government that absolutely needed to be exposed. And people still yet were okay with what was going on because obviously there wasn't much of a protest for that. People were waiting for someone to save them. And when Trump announced his presidency in 2015, people wanted to believe in the most peaceful way of a different country, a country that was finally not fucking them over. Right? They wanted to believe in someone that was going to save them. And so they cast their votes and they voted. And that began to really ramp up. Obviously, Obama being a part of the establishment swamp, right, was the biggest term being used, swamp. Along with Hillary and the media. When Trump announced and began to run, the establishment saw Trump as a threat to their control, their power. And so what we know, right, is that this is where the problems really began, but they began well before then. It was just more noticeable because you had Hillary calling conservatives, a basket of deplorables, and much more. And this is where the terms fascist, Nazi was really beginning to be used a lot more, and a lot more to describe victims of rhetoric, propaganda. This is where tyranny began to really ramp up. And this is where the divide really started to begin. Because people began to choose their sides, and most people were refusing to have civil discourse with one another. And that is where a lot of people really shined. And that is where a lot of hope to save this country from it being torn from the inside out, that's where that began. That's where that was birthed, because you had people like Charlie Kirk, Steven Crowder, and Candace Owens. Then you had you had others, right? I can't I can't I can't remember their names right off the top of my head right now. But you know, you know who I'm talking about, back in 2015, who were speaking to college students on college campuses, just as Charlie Kirk did, right? You had a lot of people doing that, a lot of people, and so there was so much more discourse, though violent, right? I would say half of the time violent, there was still discourse. And I would say the majority of it verbally violent, but also peaceful as well. Um, and that began to get worse and worse and worse over Trump's presidency. And what we thought, Trump to be a good president, he was just another swamp creature. Obviously, um, advocating for red flag laws, and then also advocating to violate people's Fifth Amendment process, or people's Fifth Amendment, right? The right to due process. Because he was talking about taking people's guns before trial, right? Which is not the right way to do things. And look, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. That is the way the law is. That is what our country was founded on. Innocent until proven guilty. And so you have to go through due process to be proven guilty. And this is what people are so willing to forget. Yes, we see things happen right before our eyes, but we still have to go through due process. That is the law. Right. And for those who are mentally ill, just because they have an accusation of them being mentally ill does not give us the right to then confiscate and trample on their Second Amendment. You have to understand that. You have to. It's one thing if they used a firearm or a weapon, a knife, a hammer, to commit crime, to confiscate that, right? Obviously, because it's evidence. But it's a completely other thing to then go and confiscate everything else that they have. That is unlawful. We don't have the right to do that. So for Trump to call for that, and then also call for bump stock bans and suppressor bans, I believe, which are also unconstitutional. It's a huge problem as well. So it's one thing, right, if he says something that, which he does a lot, out of line. It's another thing if he's actively taking steps to violate people's rights. And that's just the truth. It's exactly why I am not a Trump supporter at all. I'm not an anyone supporter. I support who is best for the nation objectively. And right now, we don't have anyone that is good for that. Well, I would say, people like Brandon Herrera. I would say people like him. You know, but I'm sure there are some good politicians out there. I'm sure there are. But the majority of what we've seen from our government, no. Our politics have become a sickness. And we've really started to see how much of a sickness these past 5 years alone. It began we began to see the mental health crisis really start 2015, or I would say it began to it began to we began to see it more prevalent, or I guess more noticeable, because people were crying when Hillary lost, and they were believing the rhetoric because they were vulnerable. They went to colleges being indoctrinated, and a lot of them didn't do their own research because they've made colleges so difficult. I know all about that. They've made colleges so difficult that people just quit putting in as much effort in, or I would say that maybe they don't put any effort. It's not that they don't put any effort in at all. It's just that the worth for the effort is not there, right? And so people obviously are not going to be incentivized to put as much effort in as they really should. It's why so many college students are using AI to write their essays. Come on, man, really? So, um, and that started from an early age, right? You convince people that you act one way, whether they are male or female, discard every single thing that makes them male or female, right? And you have people that don't think for themselves. They look to you to tell them what to do, and that's exactly what's happened. Our education system has done a good job of that, along with all of this rhetoric. And these kids who listen to this rhetoric legitimately believe every single thing that mainstream media says, politicians say. And look, we have politicians, we have political analysis, we have reporters who are actually saying that we are at war, that people should take up weapons and take action. And take action. That has actually been said. They have talked about civil war. I'm talking about the left here, obviously. They have talked about civil war. They have talked about blocking lawful processes. They have warped the minds of the young to commit these atrocities, and have and have completely accelerated the rate, or maybe not the rate, but they have completely they have made the mental health crisis so much worse. We see it everywhere now. Mental illness everywhere. And this is by design, for control. If you can divide a people on just about everything, then either they will take themselves out and you have less people to fight to conquer, or, and here's the scary part, they will look to you for everything. Meaning that they can be controlled because they can be manipulated to divide in every which way that fits whoever is doing the dividing. And well, now, with so many people who legitimately believe that their lives are being, that their lives are at stake simply for the reason of how people believe, such as, Charlie Kirk, then and then they turn on the TV and they go into these echo chambers, which I've seen a lot of other YouTubers use that term, such as, subreddits, threads, and then the dark web as well. And they further tribalize and dwell in each other's delusions. It only further exacerbates that problem, and then that is what led us to Charlie. And so now, what's going to happen? Well, the problem is only going to continue to get worse. As I've said it, we are on the precipice of civil war. We are. We are seeing exactly what people saw in the 1850s. I mean, even before that, I would just say the mid 1800s. We're seeing what people in the mid 1800s saw right before the Civil War. Or I mean, even maybe a decade or two before. But tensions have gotten so high now that, I mean, the lid is about to blow. I think, I really do, because Charlie was quite possibly the last voice for reason. So, now there is no more discourse. There is no more talking and understanding. The people who have been willing to talk and understanding have been reasoned with, and they have actually changed their stances. Because guess what? That's reality. What's not reality anymore is the left. The right and moderates are the ones that are in reality. And so the left has been, the leftist ideology has been a mental illness for a while now, but it's a threatening terrorist ideology. And it's been that way for, I mean, for a few years now, actually. Right? Because otherwise, Portland wouldn't have burned for 90 days straight. The Kenosha incident would have never have happened. Irina would have never have lost her life. Charlie would have never have lost his life. These wouldn't have happened if it wasn't a mental illness. So the country is mourning and the country is angry at this ideology, but it should also be angry at the root cause, which I have explained. And so, what I urge all of you to do is obviously be prepared to defend yourself and carry everywhere you go, but to open your eyes and realize where the real issues are and recognize that, yes, the leftists are now a terrorist organization and they are the enemy. But we should also recognize that those who pushed people like Tyler to do what he did are the root cause, and they are the enemy to this republic. That is the truth. That is the truth. They are tyrants that deserve treason. Or, excuse me, they are tyrants that deserve charges for treason. Because their actions have led to the result of Charlie's life being taken. And many more that don't get covered in the news. And that is the truth. I'm still figuring things out. I think we all are. And so I don't have everything 100% correct. I don't think anyone ever will. But I do know one thing. Our government is way too big and is greedy and has become destructive. And that's the real problem. It's become destructive. And the people have had about enough. We are all being manipulated, we are all being manipulated and gaslit into fighting and killing each other by the hands of those at the top. And that's the real issue. That's the real problem. So keep that in mind. Action should absolutely be taken against Tyler. He should receive the death penalty, and he is, rightfully so. I feel bad for his family. I feel bad for Charlie's family that had to watch that happen. I appreciate those that turned Tyler in. I believe if you knew something was going to happen, you should have done it beforehand. But we don't know that just yet, so I'm going to wait to comment on that. Things are going to continue to get worse. And it's not going to be city against city. No, these are going to be small bands, small pockets of people that are skirmishing at each other. People will be fighting each other in the streets. I would expect people to use their own houses as cover, or just out in the streets, malls. But I expect to see bands of things happening. And this is just speculation here. It's not going to be. Now, I do believe eventually that'll happen because people will gather together, those who are like minded. They will gather together. But it's not going to be this line for line battle. You know, these major armies that are fighting it against each other, like how we saw in the Civil War. And this is something that Tim Pool was saying earlier, and I quite really agree with as well. This is what Civil War, well, what Civil War really looks like, unorganized, right? Because this is people fighting amongst themselves, right? The American Civil War were states fighting amongst each other, right? And so there was a more there was more there was more organization. You don't have that here. These are people who have homes, families, people who could be neighbors. And so that's why I say there'll be small bands, but eventually I think things will begin to collect together. Or excuse me, um those bands, those groups will collect together. And that's where things will become more organized. And states may decide to jump in if it gets bad enough. I think states will definitely jump in. And you know, uh, but there's already things happening, especially in Chicago with the National Guard, if I remember correctly. Trump wanting to send in the National Guard in Chicago, and there were a lot of threats about that. So things are already in motion. That's why I definitely believe that civil war is here. We have people killing each other for their beliefs. And when you see that happen, that's when you know war is here. We didn't want this. I didn't want this. I've seen war. I didn't want this. But the left does. And those who propagated this do. And that's the truth. They have said many times over that we are at war and that they should take up arms, weapons, and take action. That's why I say that. And they have a lot of puppets, tools at their disposal. Or excuse me, at their disposal. And you best believe, since they have control over them, they'll use them. And America will turn into absolute violence with AI sweeping across the nation, getting as powerful as it is. That will further divide people because it will be increasingly harder to discern reality from delusion. Jobs will be lost, people will get desperate. And you have enough desperate people just to eat and survive, you will have conflict. We are falling from the we are rotting from the inside, and we are repeating every single mistake that Rome committed. So that's where we're at. That's where we're at now, and I expect things to get so much worse. The fall of America is happening. It's already here. I expect things to unravel in the next 5 years. I don't know when this country will fall or if it will fall, but the trajectory does point in that direction and very swiftly. So, just so I'm not rambling on any longer, our country is pretty close to its demise, and it was orchestrated by those who were running it. Now, I believe this is definitely an effort for global control, for a one world order, because not only this is happening to one nation, this is happening to multiple and at the same time. To Japan, Korea, the UK, Australia, even China, France, Ireland. This is happening everywhere, it seems like. And it's too convenient to not notice. So, those are my thoughts. You guys let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. I know this was a longer video, but I think all of this really needs to be said. Is and this is also what needs to be said too. Is as angry and as sad as we are, we must remain in control of our emotions. And I say that because I'm speaking to myself right now too. I know through my PTSD, my depression and anxiety, I know for a fact that there are a lot of things that take me away from my control. And this is definitely one of them. To see my country to turn into what it has as someone who has served it and loved it my entire life. It's heartbreaking. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say, guys. Protect yourselves, protect your family, get guns, get ammo, medical equipment, food, water. Look at the video. Look at the videos that I've already put out. Train. Obey the law. That abides by the Constitution. Abide the law. So, but before I go, I do want to say this. For those who are cheering for Charlie's death, you should not have your voices silenced. You shouldn't be banned from social media, but you should be investigated. And you should be made public examples of and get absolutely ratioed. And as Bo Refik has said over on his channel, we need to know who these people are, because if we take them off of these platforms, we lose sight of these people. And when we lose sight of our enemies, we don't know when or where or how they're going to strike, because these people hate you and they do delight in seeing you dead. Look at these videos that are on X. So just be careful out there. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your family. If you need me for anything, please reach out. I'm always here. I love you all. I wish you a lovely day. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye, guys.